afternoon to everybody. My name is Julie Ansis. I'm the founding director of Psychologists Against Anti-Semitism. And I'd like to welcome you to our speaker series. The overarching mission and aim of Psychologists Against Anti-Semitism is to, one, address anti-Semitism as relates to the field of psychology, and two, foster Jewish affirming training, education, research, and practice. We are composed of over 300 psychologists and other mental health professionals, including faculty, clinicians, and administrators. If you wish to know more about us and join us, what I'm going to do is put the website address in the chat, and all you have to do is complete the form in the link at the bottom of the homepage of the website, and you'll be added to our email list. So now for today's event. I am absolutely delighted to introduce our inaugural speaker, my very good friend and colleague, Dr. Mark Kiselica. Mark will speak for approximately 30 minutes, and we will then open the floor to question and answer. Our mics should be muted to avoid any disruptions. If you wish to speak after Mark concludes his talk, please click on the reaction tab on your screen and tap raise hand, and then you could ask Mark your questions. So I'm going to introduce Mark now much more formally. Dr. Mark Kiselica is a licensed psychologist, professor of psychology, and director of the School of Behavioral Sciences and Education at Penn State Harrisburg. A former president of the Society for the Psychological Study of Men and Masculinity, Dr. Kiselica is the author of over 100 conference presentations and 155 professional publications, including Multicultural Counseling with Teenage Fathers, the Handbook of Counseling Boys and Adolescent Males, Confronting Prejudice and Racism During Multicultural Training, Counseling Troubled Boys, and When Boys Become Parents, Adolescent Fatherhood in America. Dr. Kiselica is the editor of the Routledge Book Series on Counseling and Psychotherapy with Boys and Men. He's also a fellow of the American Psychological Association and was named Researcher of the Year by both the American Mental Health Counselors Association and the Society for the Psychological Study of Men and Masculinity. Dr. Kiselica is also a fellow of the American Council on Education and was the recipient of the American Counseling Association's award for a Humanitarian and Caring Person in honor of his work to combat racism and anti-Semitism. The title of his talk today is Embracing Jewish Friends and Combating Anti-Semitism, the Joys and Duties of Being a Gentile Ally. Welcome, Mark. I am so pleased to have you today. I am so honored that you said yes to be our inaugural speaker for the Psychologists Against Anti-Semitism series. And so the floor is yours.
Julie, thanks so much. Julie, can you hear me? Give me a thumbs up if you can. If you can, then I'm sure everybody else can. You know, considering the title, I just feel compelled to make an opening statement about my friendships and what this moment means to me. You know, I hope it's not in any way hyperbole to say I feel as though I've just been welcomed into a family, and that this is an experience that has happened with me again and again and again in my life, particularly when I enter primarily Jewish communities. I am so touched by the invitation to talk, Julie, and that you and others think that I have something of value to offer. Having said that I am thrilled and touched and that I feel genuinely welcome to give this address, I also want to say that I struggle for several reasons about doing this address. And I'd like to explain that to everybody in the audience. Why did I struggle? Well, part of it has to do with my limitations. I want everybody to know, obviously, I'm not a Jew. I am also not an expert on Judaism or Jewish culture or anti-Semitism or a country that's very important to many Jews throughout the world, and that's Israel. I'm not an expert on any of those subjects, although I will say that I'm learning a lot, and that I also strongly believe in the preservation and the necessity of the state of Israel, because in my mind, it's a matter of survival for Jews in the world. I'm also a little uncomfortable because it is just humbling to think of what some of the people in the audience have done, and others who might not be in the audience, but I've gotten to know them through Psychologists Against Anti-Semitism. You know, I look at Julie's writings and having formed an organization like this, and Eileen Serlin, whom I haven't met yet, but I've seen what she's been putting in terms of her posts here, and having listened to Beth Ram-Ryer when she gave an address to us when she was a campaign address when she was running for APA president, and then just right here on my campus, to name two people, Neil Lyford and Hannah Spector. What they do is absolutely amazing, and it's very humbling. And later on, I'm going to be talking about Ed and Esther Beck, who are just as amazing. So, and there's a third reason I was a little hesitant and struggle, and it's that, you know, I made a conscious decision when I accepted this invitation and decided on the title that I'll show you the printed title in a moment. I made a very deliberate decision that I was certainly not going to take a holier than thou approach to this topic. And the reason I've done that is that I have so much to learn, and as I will explain in more detail later, there was a point in my life that I know it would be safe to say that I was a very ignorant person, and that thankfully by some very fortunate experiences for me, I've moved from a state of ignorance to this ever-growing state of consciousness. So I want people to know, in a little bit, I'm going to disclosing in a public forum, in something that's going to be recorded and shared with others, some of my own imperfections, and that's not an easy thing to do. Nevertheless, in spite of all of these hesitations, I do believe that I have something of value to offer, and that's why I accepted Julie's kind invitation to speak today. So that's and one other thing I should say is that just so you understand what my address will be and what it is not, this is not going to be a very scholarly or esoteric presentation. This is in very many ways a personal narrative about my journey from the state of ignorance that I mentioned earlier to a state of ever-growing consciousness. So I'm going to share my screen, and periodically I will stop sharing my screen because there's certain points in this address that I feel it's important to see me and my face. But for now, let me share my screen. And I'm going to ask Julie to give me a thumbs up when can you see the screen, Julie? Good. Okay,
Yeah.
so I'm going to enlarge my screen. This is the title of my presentation. I won't repeat it again, but what I did want to share with you is my email address, which is right here, msk317@psu.edu. So I work at Penn State Harrisburg. This is my email address there, msk317@psu.edu. And as Julie said, she'll be sharing a video of this address for you. But just in case anybody would like to get in touch with me, you have my email address. So I'm going to begin by telling you a little bit about my religious and ethnic roots, and I do that for 3 reasons. The first has to do with what I've learned about women's ways of knowing. And some of you who know me already know that I have devoted a big part of my life to studying and understanding troubled boys and men. And I've also spent a good deal of my career having primarily women in my classes in psychology and in graduate classes in counseling and counseling psychology. So although my scholarship has been, and so much of my clinical work and service in the community has been focused on helping troubled boys and men, I've also felt an obligation to try and learn everything I can about women and their ways of knowing. Because if I'm going to help men, I feel an equal obligation to help the important girls and women in their lives, and to be just a more gender sensitive male who works with women. So there is a particular model that has had a big influence on my thinking. It's the self and relation model, and came out of the Stone Center, and its writings were published in this book. Some of its writings were published in this book, Women's Ways of Knowing.
Hold on, hold on, I got rid of that.
Uh,
You said you had to have a 5-minute break?
I'm sorry, somebody talking to me?
No, it's all good.
Okay. So, in a nutshell, this model talked about there tends to be some differences in the way men and women approach learning and the look at intellectual matters, and that men tend to be separate knowers who kind of take kind of a doubting Thomas approach to things, whereas for women, there's more of empathic knowing. And I love this picture here. Look at this girl on the left. That you can see her has a laser focus on this other girl that she's sitting with. And to me, it's a beautiful artistic expression of the facial expression of empathy. And to bring it into my own experience, here is a student who shared this picture after she had come back from a community engaged learning experience in Guatemala. And look at the expression on her face and what's happening with these girls around here, how they're hugging each other. And when this student came back, she talked about not just what she learned about Nicaragua, but just how it impacted her emotionally and how she changed as a person. To me, this is connected knowing, and I feel that for this forum, I want you to discover the connected knower in me. But that's just one reason why I plan to share information about my roots, and another has to do with the influence of just the amazing Daryl Wing Sue. I think everybody here is aware of what a prolific scholar and influential researcher he is. And in this article, among many things he's published that I read, he was emphasizing that when you're talking about issues that have to deal with hate and discrimination, and anti-Semitism is certainly one of those, they are profoundly human experiences. So since I'll be talking about anti-Semitism, I feel it's important for you to know about me and who I am as a human being and my roots. And there's a third reason why I'm telling you about my background. It's just me. That's just Mark. People who know me know that I'm an open book, and it's pretty easy for me to self-disclose. So given those reasons, I'd like to introduce you a little bit into my world. Now, this is one of my favorite pictures of my dear late parents. Person on the right is Otto Rudolph Kiselica, my dear late father. He was a very quiet man. He was born in extreme poverty in a Slovak immigrant neighborhood in the city of Bayonne, New Jersey. English was his second language there. His mother died when he was 8. His father was an alcoholic, very neglectful, and my father basically raised himself and had to drop out of school in the 8th grade and worked in horrible conditions with a horrific leg injury, and it would eventually cripple him, that work. And he and my dear mom became a great team. My mom was also born in poverty. My dad's family fled Europe after World War I, and my mom's family fled crippling poverty in Ireland. And she's a very proud Irish Catholic who is a great mom. And I'm telling you this because I am a Gentile whose life was centered in the Catholic Church. We went to church every Sunday. I was taught in Catholic schools. My dad, with that bad leg, and in spite of how many hours he worked 2 jobs, he was always volunteering at the church, as was my mom. And I'm very proud of what they accomplished. My mom at age 40, after having had her 5th child, went to college and graduated in 4 years with a 4.0, and went on to be an award-winning teacher in a Catholic school. This is her in the schoolyard where she was eventually hired and where I was educated and my siblings were educated as a boy. And I just cherish her, as I do my dad. And this is a priceless photo because it captures the essence of who he was: quiet, present, always supportive. This was at my first communion, which is an important day in the Catholic community for me. So I've told you this so that you understand a little bit about me and who I am, and that in spite of that, I am ashamed to say that I was a person who had embraced some very troubling biases. And I want to take you back to this picture of my parents, because I had some anti-Semitic biases in spite of these wonderful parents. My parents were not perfect. I am not idealizing them, even though I love them dearly. They were not perfect, but I can tell you, in all honesty, I never once heard either my mother or my father say a racist word. I never heard them say an anti-Semitic comment. In fact, although our contact with Jews was very limited as I was growing up, the only words my parents ever said about Jewish people were highly complimentary. My mom telling, for example, a story about how one time she was lost in New York and she looked for help, and these Jewish women empathized with her and were so worried with her and stayed with her till she found her way to safety. So this is what my parents taught me. And now it's time for me to stop sharing my screen for just a moment, because I want you to look at me now. Because in spite of their admirable example, in some ways I became anti-Semitic. And I want you to see my face as I acknowledge this publicly. I grew up around in a very insulated Catholic environment, where primarily the boys and men, but many women, told anti-Semitic jokes and laughed at them. And when I was a boy, into my early teenage years, I did the same thing. And I want you to know, I'm ashamed about that. It's not a part of my life that I'm proud of. And I say prayers of thanks every day for events in my life that have been a blessing. And as you will hear, as I continue with my story, I have been fortunate to have had a number of experiences that that really helped me to move beyond those biases. So I'm going to start sharing my, I'm going to try sharing my screen again now to go back to my slides. Julie, can you see the slides again? Okay, great. So there were 3 experiences that got me moving, that I should say that started to shake up this bias thinking that I have. And here's the first of them. So I have a little quiz for you. This you don't have to answer, but here's my question. Which of these men portray the character Tevye from the musical Fiddler on the Roof? Was it me? That's my picture on the left when I was 18 years old. A, was it B, Zero Mostel, or C, was it all 3 of us? I'm sorry, both of us. Was it C, the both of us? And you may be shocked and surprised to hear that the answer is C. It was both of us. So look at that. Here I was, this blonde-haired, blue-eyed, Aryan-looking Gentile who once played Tevye in a community theater, a production of Fiddler on the Roof. And here is a picture from the dress rehearsal. Now, can you see my pointer, Julie? Is my pointer showing up? So this is a rehearsal of the scene where Zeitel, Tevye's oldest daughter, marries Laserwolf, the butcher. And here I am on the left, Tevye. Every night they spray painted my hair gray and glued this beard on me. And this was the wedding scene in Fiddler on the Roof. So now I'm going to come back in a minute after I show some pictures to talk about how that impacted me. But I also want you to know that during my late teens and through my early 20s, I also was greatly influenced by a number of films, some of which were documentaries, such as the world famous and influential documentary Night and Fog about the Holocaust, but also dramatic productions that were starting to come out on TV in the mid to late 70s, some of which were criticized for, in some people's opinion, perhaps not capturing the essence of the Holocaust. But for me as a Gentile, all of these films shook me up. And then there's one other catalytic experience I want to talk about, and it was a decision I made to attend the New School for Social Research in Manhattan in their graduate program in clinical psychology in 1979. So how did that happen, right? This experience triggered something in me, as did this. And then as I was searching for graduate schools, and I knew they had a clinical program, I read about their history, and I learned that in the 1930s, the New School for Social Research became a haven for Jewish scholars fleeing Nazi Germany. And I said to myself, I want to go there to school. So let me stop sharing my screen again. So let me tell you how these things impacted me. For those of you who've seen the play or the movie Fiddler on the Roof, you know what the story is about, but just in case anybody hasn't seen it, what I learned from that as a Gentile boy was that, tradition is so important to people of Jewish faith, of devout Jewish faith, that the greatest wealth and privilege that Tevye could have if he were a rich man would be to have time to read the Torah. And then at the end of the play, as Tevye, I had to pull a cart with my family by my side as we fled our hometown of Anatevka because of the pogrom that Tevye and his family were experiencing in Tsarist Russia at the time. And it was because of these things that when Night and Fog was being shown, or dramatizations of the Holocaust, I suddenly felt compelled to watch them. And then they together prompted me to apply to the new school. And then when I was there, something just incredible happened. I experienced this profound cross-cultural experience because the two classes I took there that semester in these huge amphitheaters with about 150 students in it was this mixture of Jews from all kinds of backgrounds. And I became friends with them and they with me. And I learned so much about Judaism and the various Jewish traditions. And in order to understand it better, I started to read a little bit about those traditions. And I read the novel, The Chosen by Chaim Potek, and I would sit around with Jewish friends. Particularly, there was a Hasidic woman who started to become interested in me and I in her. And we would talk for hours about how we were raised and what was important to us. And I couldn't get enough of it. And years later, you know, all of these things stayed in my mind, but I had never really been moved to action other than trying to learn until something happened in Newtown, Pennsylvania. So I'm talking about many years later, when I was now a psychologist and a professor at the College of New Jersey. And I do want to warn people who are Jewish and have experienced anti-Semitism that I'm now about to tell you an upsetting story. And this is what happened. I subscribed to the Bucks County Courier-Times, and I got up early in the morning to read the paper. And I had already at this time been involved in a number of initiatives to confront racism and bullying in schools. And I opened the paper, and there was a front page article about the fact that a Jewish synagogue in our town had been defaced. Someone had gone to the synagogue and spray painted a swastika on the wall of the synagogue. And I sat back that morning and I thought about my Jewish friends that I had met at the new school. And I thought about, imagine if my sons, and at that time I had two sons, I would later have a daughter. If my sons and I and my wife walked into our church and our altar and sacristy had been marred by someone, or if the church in our downtown that had primarily African Americans had the N-word spray painted on it. I'm telling you this because before, I had gone from a little bit of movement from these biases to consciousness. But when this happened, that swastika being sprayed at the synagogue, for the first time in my life, I was moved to action. And I have to give tremendous credit to a woman named Natalie Kay, who was a fellow Gentile community organizer. And she and I got in touch, and we found other people who were upset by this. And we contacted the Anti-Defamation League in Philadelphia. And we started the very first community-based anti-hate, no place for hate campaign in Pennsylvania. So what do? We brought in legal and police experts on how to combat hate crimes. We had events on getting to know each other, shared dinners, marches, going to each other's churches, attending services. It was a beautiful thing. And it brings me now to sharing my screen again, if I may. Bear with me a moment. I'm going to share my screen so you can see the slides again. So it was a catalyst for me to this never-ending series of events that I was involved in. Ed Beck, who's on this call, was involved in ACA, and he was telling about how Jews were being treated in very insensitive manners in the American Counseling Association. And he was starting a special interest group. And I asked Ed if I could join, and he welcomed me in open arms. A good colleague, Steve Weinreich, published an article about those events. And then Scott McGowan, the editor of Journal of Counseling and Development, had received suggestions from a number of people, asked Mark Kiselica to write a Gentile's reaction to Steve's article, and I did. And I have to admit to you, I was scared then, a little nervous as I am now, because in that peer-reviewed article, I talked about my own journey as well as, and that was a much more scholarly piece about what we have to do to address these things. And I witnessed Ed Beck work with others to create scholars for peace in the Middle East, and I joined. And I didn't have a big role with him, but I learned a lot by watching what they did and attending events that they sponsored. And I eventually became a provost at Iona College, and during the years I was there, I just took off, and how I was welcomed by all of these different organizations who just were interested in creating connections, which was so admirable, and I was glad to be a part of it. When I arrived here, and I'll be showing you the pictures of these people who are named here, I discovered we had a Center on Holocaust and Jewish Studies, and I'm going to tell you more about what they've done and how my colleague Hannah Spector, the great work she's done on Holocaust and genocide education. And I gradually became involved in this network many of you are aware of, the Academic Engagement Network, which wants to bring the Jewish perspective into DEI initiatives, which was also the focus of this wonderful retreat at George Washington University that I attended, with much thanks to Benjamin Jacobs and Alana Weltman, who helped to organize that. And this group, of course, who's sponsoring us today, and a panel that I helped to organize with the support of many people from this group. And we'll be talking about transgressions and APA against Jews. So I don't want to dwell on what I've done here. Much of it is just mainly keeping my ears open so that I can learn. But what have I learned? Number one, if I could give advice, and I do, to fellow Gentiles, it's to learn about Jewish culture and historical experience. And for me, I want you to know it's an ongoing process. I learn bits and pieces here and there, and it makes me a better person all the time. And that we Gentiles, and I say we, must acknowledge that anti-Semitism exists. So let me talk. And it's not just the Holocaust, right? Anti-Semitism is pervasive in our country and throughout the world today. You know, I'm deeply concerned about the fact that there was an organized destruction of Jewish cemeteries throughout the United States just a few years ago. You know, the slaughter at a synagogue, and I'm troubled by the fact that in APA and in some of our training programs, the concerns of Jewish students are dismissed as not being legitimate, right? All of these things concern me. Only 24% of K through 12 students know what the Holocaust is. And in my own Catholic community, God, if I look back on our history, look at what happened during the Crusades. The thousands and thousands of Jews who were killed by Catholics, and the blood libel myth that these false allegations that Jews kidnap babies and kill them and use their bloods for ritualistic purposes. Yet, one thing I must emphasize is that although anti-Semitism is a salient experience for most Jews, it's by far the only interest, right? And this is the reason I accentuated joy in my title, and friendship. And it's that there's just so many wonderful things going on in the Jewish community that have to deal with education and with good works. I would encourage Gentiles to be good listeners, empathic, and humble. And I'm lowering my voice now because I do feel that we have an obligation to go into Jewish communities and just listen quietly, because there's much that we have to learn, and to acknowledge and empathize with Jews who've experienced anti-Semitism, and also to empathize with Gentiles who have been anti-Semitic, that the power of prejudice is pervasive, and that we have to empathize with people who are themselves hurt by that power, and to confront our own biases about Jews and to try and eradicate them. But at the same time, to recognize that we have a moral obligation to confront anti-Semitism. It is a moral obligation because of the harm it does to the world. And to say to people, figure out what fits for you in terms of contributing to the cause. So not everyone can do what Julie has done. Right? Julie's created an international organization, or, I look at what Eileen Serlin has done, and Ed Beck. I can't match what they do. So I've figured out what are the ways I can contribute. And some people are great organizers, like my friend Larry Gerstein, who's created international initiatives, and other people are very quiet and they do their work in very small ways. Maybe it's just welcoming a Jewish person who's just moved into the neighborhood and inviting them over for coffee. Another piece of advice is to find a Jewish mentor. And part of the reason for that is that you will be challenged if you're a Gentile and you enter the arenas that I have. And what would I do without Ed Beck and Larry Gerstein and Julie, the way they've mentored me, and some of the things I've learned. For example, when I was younger and my hair was really blonde, I sometimes had, in my forays into the Jewish community, I had people who were standoffish to me and would stare at me and actually look at me with kind of a little tone of hostility. And I'll never forget a dear friend named Warren Spielberger, who's done some great work in Israel, fostering interfaith dialogues. He said to me, Mark, you have to understand that for some of us, when we encounter someone who looks like you, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, Aryan-looking man, it has a visceral reaction because of what the Nazis did. And it may not be personal. So just try to keep that in mind. And that was really helpful to me to have him mentor me. And then the last bit of advice is to embrace and treasure Jewish friends and like-minded Gentiles. So with that in mind, I just want to leave you with some images of that. These are two of my best buddies. Two of us are Gentiles and one's a Jew. We've been friends for over 40 years. This is one of my oldest friends, Larry Gerstein. We were having fun this day. And by the way, Julie knows this. When we're at APA, Ed Beck knows this. We introduced ourselves as twin brothers of different mothers. And this was a gag on his birthday. I had gotten my hair cut really short, was trying to spike it, and I went out and bought glasses like his so I could pass as his twin brother from a different mother. He's my dear friend, as are Ed and Esther Beck, who from the day I met Ed affirmed me, and then he and Esther took me in as a part of their family. And I've been able to witness all of this humanitarian work that they do in the community, and role models for me, as is Julie. This is a picture of us I think we had known each other 25 years at this point, Julie, but we finally took a picture together at APA. We were sitting at a circle of people at a dinner. And I'm very proud of my colleague, Hannah Spector here, who is just a brilliant intellectual, who recently published this book on education and responsibility. I'm sorry, that should read In Search of Responsibility in Education. I apologize, Hannah, for that mistake, but she's an expert on genocide education. And I feel that one of my roles as a school director is to support her good work. And this guy deserves a tremendous credit. He's a fellow Gentile. He quietly, with a very limited budget, as the head of the School of Humanities, sponsors events, puts his budget towards quietly supporting the Center on Holocaust and Jewish Studies, which is led by my tremendous friend here, Neil Lyford. And boy, it is something to go to a lecture on the Holocaust when Neil is lecturing. And I'm really grateful to him for all he does through the center, and the way he has just welcomed me to his events. And the final picture is just another Gentile who's going to step up and run the center when Neil retires. So a Gentile woman is going to be replacing a Jewish man. All right, so let me stop sharing my screen now and come back to me. This is my closing comment. To my Jewish friends, I say thank you. Thank you very much. I don't know what I would do without you. And to my Gentile friends, I say this, especially those who might not be involved in anti-Semitic, fighting anti-Semitism, and it's this: we have a moral obligation to do so, even if we don't have Jewish friends. But I can guarantee you this: if you do this work, you will make Jewish friends and your life will be richer for it. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to you, Julie. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark, for your very brave and very moving account of your personal experiences and transcendence of differences, as well as the importance of allyship and your recommendations with regard to allyship. It is so profoundly important, as I've expressed to you on a personal level, but at a larger level for so many reasons, including the words you use, the harm done to the world. And I see you as somebody who's trying to not only prevent further harm, but do so much good in the world. And for that, I really value you as a colleague professionally, but very much personally. So thanks, Mark, so much. If folks want to ask a question or make a comment, please click on the reactions button at the bottom of your screen, and you'll see raise hand under the emojis, and all you have to do is click on that. So feel free. Anyone? Ted Kahn. And you have to unmute yourself, Ted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Yes. So Mark, two things that come out just immediately from having heard this, and it was an incredibly moving presentation. I think part of it is because, unlike so much of what we end up seeing, which are sound bites and single lines, et cetera, this is a personal story of transition and of education. So I guess my question is, how far back do we need to carry this in terms of making the kinds of changes that you came to later? Is this the kind of thing, that we really, I mean, obviously we should be starting doing this about bias and anything else, when kids are very young, et cetera. But I'm kind of wondering, at what point are people ready to actually open up and accept some of the changes and some of the differences in the worldview that you actually experienced yourself?
Well, Ted, by the way, it's so nice to meet you after seeing your wonderful posts on the listserv. So it's just a couple quick thoughts. The first is, this has to start at an early age, and it has to be in schools and in homes, but particularly in schools, because we don't always know what's happening in homes, right? And it's one of the reasons I admire Hannah Spector so much and Boaz at the main campus, is that they are a part of trying to influence public policy so that not only education about genocide and the Holocaust is there, but it's extremely important that we have cross-cultural education, and it's very troubling to me that states are trying to block that. That anything that is seen as empathy building or trying to learn about the traumatic histories that populations have experienced, that's very troubling for me. So I feel an obligation, both as an educator, to try to influence what happens in classes at an early age, but also to influence policymakers on this matter.
Thank you. Dorothy?
Hi, everybody. Mark, first of all, thank you. Second of all, I'm astounded as someone who practiced in Westfield, New Jersey for years, that Roselle Catholic actually did a production of Fiddler on the Roof. That speaks volumes to me. And I did want to share with everyone here that thanks to people like Lenore Walker and Laura Barbanel and Beth Ramreimer, there will now be a fund to fight anti-Semitism at the American Psychological Foundation. This is, I think, the first formal way in which anyone related to APA is going to start to address anti-Semitism. And this is the commercial, if you will. I'm letting you all know, because we are going to need a lot of money to do this. And we need you all to dig deep so that we can do what we can against anti-Semitism. We are particularly gearing the fund toward people who are working with young people, to circle back to what was just said. So thank you again.
Well, I'm so grateful for the generosity of people you mentioned for that. And by the way, it's wonderful to meet someone from Westfield. I had cousins, Kiselicas, who grew up in Westfield. So good to see you.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to make a comment or ask a question of Mark? Any last words? I just,
Was that last request to me or to the entire audience?
anybody, but before you do that, if you so choose to give some last words, I did put a link in the chat to the website for Psychologists Against Anti-Semitism. If anybody wants to join, just go to the homepage, click on the link. And to Benjamin's question to me, yes, go ahead and share that link. That's perfectly fine. Do you want to speak to that, Benjamin?
Yeah, I'll just say something about it for a second. This is Ben Jacobs. Mark, first of all, thank you so much for this deeply personal and moving and important presentation. It was just wonderful to be here with you and to have learned with you over last summer. And I appreciate the shout out to that effort that we did last summer to put together an institute on a fellowship program and summer institute on anti-Semitism and Jewish inclusion in education settings. So I wanted to put the link to that information about that in the chat as a, I hope not too shameless advertisement. We are recruiting faculty from education schools, faculty and administrators for education schools for participation in this at the George Washington University. So if you're interested in some information on that, please go ahead and click on the link and feel free to send us any questions that you might have. We'd love to have participation from anyone in APA and beyond who sees their work as having an impact on educational settings. Thank you for that opportunity.
Hey, Ben, it's so good to see you again. That what you and Alana did in organizing that retreat and the Naomi Foundation and the facilitators you brought in from that consulting company, I got to tell you, that was a very special experience. And I can't wait till I see you again, my friend, but I salute you. I'm so grateful for what you managed to do.
Likewise, thank you.
Thank you. Ed? Ed, you're still muted.
I was wondering whether I should make this comment or not, but one of the happiest days of my life, and it was bittersweet, was when Mark called me to tell me he had gotten the directorship at Penn State Harrisburg, knowing full well that I had been at Penn State Harrisburg for 20 years and had retired and was just about to move to Philadelphia. We've gotten together several times since, but what was so important to me, knowing Mark and loving him as much as I do, was what his hire meant in terms of the evolution of Penn State as an institution. Because I was at Penn State when there was a good bit of anti-Semitism in the administration. And it was very, very difficult to deal with. And so it's just a personal reflection on the evolution of the fine people now that Penn State is employing. It's good to see you too, Kirsten. Okay. I'm done.
Ed, as I mentioned earlier, I don't know what I would do without you. And one of the bonuses to coming to Penn State Harrisburg when I did was I knew you lived in nearby Harrisburg. Penn State Harrisburg, by the way, is actually in the town of Middletown, everybody. It's a few miles from Harrisburg. And boy, was I fortunate to live closer to you for a couple years.
Likewise. Likewise. We'll see you soon.
See you, my friend.
Any other questions or comments?
Well, I would just invite everyone, since I mentioned at the beginning that you've helped me to feel like family, you've welcomed me into a family. You know where I am. You have my email address. Please contact me if you're in the area or if you're going to the APA convention. It would be a real joy to meet others that I haven't met yet in person. But whether I've met you in person or not, if you're in the greater Harrisburg area, come see us, see our small but impressive center on Holocaust studies in the library and some of the exhibits we have there. And we'll just have fun together. It would be wonderful. So thank you.
Thank you again, Mark. And thanks everybody for showing up, and love seeing all these familiar faces. We're going to have a second speaker as part of our series, the scholar Rusi Jaspel. And the title of his talk is The Changing Face of Anti-Semitism, Social Psychological Perspective. So he's a social psychologist who's going to be speaking about his research and his perspective on the matter. That's Friday, April 28th from 10 to 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. You could find that if you're not a member of Psychologists Against Anti-Semitism, because I send out reminders, you could find that on Eventbrite. So thank you again to everybody. Big thanks to Mark for being our inaugural speaker, and always so moving.
Thanks.
Bye now.
Bye.